So once again, welcome to today's session, From Reading to Ideas, Identifying Main Arguments in a Text. Now I'll give you an overview of the session, the structure we'll be following today. So I'll give you a brief about KashfInitiative, and then we'll get an introduction of our panelists, and then we'll get into the session. So we'll be looking at these major pointers. What are arguments in a text? Why identifying arguments is important. Then we look at the other aspects, like first we'll skim the article, look for thesis statement, identifying support evidence, identifying counter arguments, synthesis the main argument, and we'll end it with tips for effective argument identification, following which there will be a Q&A session. So this is the structure for today. Now, I would like to go ahead before we begin and introduce and tell you what Kashf is about and what our plans are for the months ahead. Kashf is a non-profit initiative dedicated to supporting research and learning in the social sciences and humanities. The idea is simple. We want to pass lessons that we learned or wished we had learned during our own academic journeys. Our goal is to make the process of research and learning a bit smoother, especially when it comes to the basics and foundational training. To achieve this, we plan to offer sessions on research writing, research methodology and tools, while also creating spaces to review and showcase research work. You can visit our website to learn more about our learning schemes and the scope of our work, as well as our upcoming sessions. You'll get all the updates there. Now, let me take a moment to welcome and introduce our panelists for today's session. The main speaker for today is Dr. Khushdeep Kaur Malhotra, Assistant Professor at School of Arts and Sciences, Ahmedabad University. And our interactive student panel has two discussants, Nityashri S., PhD student of Cultural Studies at Bharatiya University, and Parvati Krishnan, Masters in Sociology at University of Madras. Now we can begin. I'm handing over the session to you, Dr. Khushdeep.
Okay, can you just tell me how I will move through the PowerPoint, or will you do it? Will somebody do it?
I can do it, Khushdeep. Also, you can share the slides if you like to. If you want to share your own screen, you could do that. Ask me to stop sharing.
Right, okay. And then I can just, yeah, so I have it open here, right?
Sure.
So let me just actually share my screen. That might be better, because I also will open up the paper.
Sure. You can share your screen.
Okay, great.
I can stop sharing, yes.
Great, okay. Okay, so people can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, and I would also like to, I'm grading, so please excuse me. I would also like to share this. Can you see the paper as well now? You can, right?
Yes, the paper is also visible here.
Okay, great. Okay. So my name is Khushdeep. I'm a assistant professor at Ahmedabad University, and I joined the university last year, and I've been teaching research methods actually, and so when the invitation came, I was very happy actually to take it up, because I've been teaching research methods, and I've also learned a lot as I've been teaching. And I'm also teaching this paper in my class next week. So this paper is about air pollution, which I think all of you have received. And what I would like to do is I would like to maybe just set it up a little bit using the PowerPoint, and then we'll go through the paper together. So if you have it with you, or if you were given the paper, it would be nice if you could pull it up on your screens, or if you have it with you printed out. I think somebody is asking if the paper can be shared again, so we can do that surely. But we have 20 minutes, and in 20 minutes, I'm gonna just sort of have go over how to read a research paper really. And the core of the research paper is always the argument that's being made, right? That's what we are there for. That's what we want to understand. Okay. And What is an argument? It's sort of the central thesis or a claim that the authors who are doing the research are making. And it's always purportedly at least supported by reasoning or evidence. There's a lot of bad research out there also, which does analysis by what my advisor used to call metaphor. So, hopefully we are able to distinguish between good arguments and arguments that are less good by looking at the quality of the evidence that is presented in support of the arguments, or reasoning, if they're an intellectual thought piece or whatever. Okay. The PowerPoint says that the argument can be explicit or it can be implied. And, the idea behind arguing something is to persuade the reader that a process is happening in a certain way, or a research question, that says that it's investigating something is actually investigating the said thing. And, we must believe the evidence that's being presented to us, right? But often in good writing, at least in my opinion and thinking, arguments are explicitly made and they are easy to understand. If there is a text in which an argument is hidden, perhaps, it's not such a good piece of writing, or perhaps it is that the authors are not clear about what they are trying to say. And when, papers come to all of us who work in this discipline for peer review, we look for clear arguments, or we make suggestions about how to make clear arguments, and they go through several iterations of review so that, the argument can be crisp and clear and easy to identify. And often, you'll begin with the abstract, and that'll itself have a lot of information, including, an argument statement that's made, and other things as well. So we'll look at the paper's abstract in just a second. So identifying the arguments is important because it helps to understand the purpose of the research and the purpose of the paper, right? Of course, it'll aid you in thinking critically about the topic, right? Because the idea is if you're reading the paper, you're reading to engage with it for whatever reason. It might be that as a student, it informs your own work, or it might be that you're reviewing the article, or it might be that you're reading it for, the purpose of engaging in the academic exercise of reading itself, right? So whatever the reason you're reading it, identifying a key argument is important to understanding also the quality of the evidence presented, whether the data used are relevant, whether the way the study was carried out actually supports what people have found, and consequently the argument they're making, and also evaluating it against other evidence that is present about that particular topic of research, right? And ultimately, why do we do all this? The goal of all of this is to move our thinking forward about certain, things and processes in society, and to build knowledge, right? And to build it in a way that is, that's transparent, and that's honest, and that's scientific, right? Whether you do quantitative or qualitative research, and I'm sure you've heard these terms before, right? In both of these fields, and of course nowadays there's a lot of mixed methods research that's being done too. We always try to support our arguments with evidence, and the evidence looks different in both cases. But some people, for example, will say that qualitative research really doesn't have empirical evidence. Actually, that's not true. There's really good grounded work and years of work often that informs qualitative arguments, as we'll see in this paper as well. Okay, so it's important to identify an argument, and it sort of gives you a feel for what the paper is about, and then you also evaluate what other things the paper is doing in the context of the argument. Okay, so every person's process is different for reading an academic text, and I really think that there is no one way to read a text, right? It's just that as you become experienced, you develop a method of reading, right? And that method of reading then helps you read more and read more volume, as well as read deeply, right? Meaning that you start to identify and understand complex ideas and also connect them together. But you also read more, right? So I teach undergrads. So in our undergrad classes, we often start with like shorter pieces, easier to understand pieces. And then by the end of the class, we always increase the level of complexity. And by the end of the class, for instance, now we have a month left, my students are going to be reading this article that I have assigned to you. And it's a 25 page piece. And, it's fairly complex, but they'll be able to read it now. But at the beginning of the class, perhaps it was not so. And a lot of them are first years, right? Or second years. And this is like the initial introduction to reading. So the point that I'm making is that everyone has their own process and there's really no sort of trick, or formula as to how to learn to read the main arguments or, a research paper. So it's really up to you. But what has been provided to you is what I think is a very, very helpful sort of layout. So I don't really like skim an article to begin with, right? When I'm reading it, but it's important to do so. Like, let's say if you're doing a lit review, right? And you need to know whether the article is relevant to the literature that you're reviewing, or it's something that has nothing to do with the question that you're asking, and it doesn't really fit in with your research plan. So for that reason, it is important to skim the reading first to decide whether it's something that you need to read or not, right? When you're skimming the reading, it also sort of helps you get a sense of what the article is about, where again, something like the abstract becomes very important. So you can, when you begin reading a research article, skim it to sort of get a sense of what it's about, but also focus very much on the abstract, which will tell you exactly what the authors are trying to do. All right. People cannot see my slides for some reason. Is this?
No, they can see your slides,
okay.
Khushi, but Khushdeep, but it's just that it's not on the slideshow mode. So if it is easy for you, you can put it on a slideshow mode, or yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for okay. Right. And as you're reading the article, whether you're skimming it or whether you're reading it with, time and concentration, you, of course, read the title, read the headings and the subheadings, and as I said, the abstract. And I'll show you an abstract. I'm sure many of you have seen research articles, and we'll focus on what we can get out of the abstract, okay? The keywords really are very important, right? Because even when you're asked to submit a research paper for publication, to a journal, or even to a book or whatever, you have, very specific keywords, often 5 or 6, that help actually the larger community search for your piece of work, right? So for instance, I work on Kashmiri Sikhs and, belonging and citizenship. So these would often be the keywords when someone searches for Kashmiri Sikhs and belonging, my pieces which I have written will come up, right? So keywords are very, very important. They give you a sense of what the piece is about. And again, whether it's like relevant to what it is that you want to do or not. Of course, the introduction is often really a very, very important part of the article. It'll tell you right after the abstract, right from the get-go, whether this is a piece that, that's important for you or not important for you. And it'll also tell you what the piece is really about, because there's a little bit of context that's given in the introduction. And often, authors will do what is known as signposting, which means that we will signal right at the beginning that this is the argument that we are making. And this is also the reason why we are making it, right? So what is the importance of the research that we are doing? Why are we doing it? And what argument are we making? And in some instances, you might also get to read in the introduction, the importance of the study, right? Is it critiquing some existing literature? Is it adding to some literature in some way? Is it taking sort of a different approach from what has been taken before about a certain topic? All of these things will become clear from reading the introduction. And then, of course, as I said, does it meet, why are you reading the article? Like, is it something that's relevant to you? As well as the questions that you want to answer. All right. So let's just have a look very quickly at the paper, and let's look at the abstract. Okay, so helpfully, so this paper was published by Rohit Negi and Prerna Srigyan. Rohit Negi, I have worked with very briefly, and he's at IIM Calcutta. The other author, I don't know so much, but it's called Peopling Technoscience, Locating the Sciences and Publics of Air Pollution in Delhi. So we've been talking about the abstract actually and the introduction, but the title, and I think it was mentioned in the PowerPoint, and headings and subheadings are also important, right? So if one were to look at this title, then, one would automatically know that this article is about air pollution, okay? Air pollution in Delhi. And it tells me a little something about the conversation between, or at least two distinct entities, right? Something called the sciences and then the publics. So there are people and then there's the science, okay? And there is something about these two that this article is discussing in the context of each other. And then I come to the main sort of heading, which is Peopling Technoscience, right? So now it's telling me that there's this technoscience that exists, whatever it is, needs to be peopled or has been peopled, okay? So the people need to be brought into the technoscience. Perhaps that's what the purpose of the paper is, or perhaps we need to understand technoscience, whatever it is, from a people's perspective. But broadly, that this paper is about air pollution in Delhi, and it brings together the people and the science, right? Okay. And it was published in a journal called Dialogue, Science, Scientists, and Society. So that also tells you something about, the paper, because every journal, for example, will have a very specific type of research that it publishes, right? So many of my, for instance, I'm writing an article which is looking at memory and memorialization among the Kashmiri Sikhs, right? Of this particular event that happened with them. And I'm going to submit it to a journal called Memory Studies, right? Because this journal, has pieces or articles that look at memory and belonging in the way that I want to talk about it, okay? So the journal also will tell you a little bit something about the content of the paper, okay? And then helpfully, there is a breakdown here of, the different sections of the paper. And you can see sort of, you can connect from the title, what these different aspects of air in Delhi are that the paper is going to be talking about. All right. So now if we look at, actually both of them used to be, I think, at Ambedkar. Okay. So here is the abstract. It's really very, very important to read the abstract. And that's why every journal or whatever insists that there be an abstract, whether you're writing a book chapter or a journal article or whatever, there will always be about a 200 to 50 word abstract that you can read, right? So can I get a show of hands for how many people have actually read the articles, so that I know? Or, okay, you don't need to give me a show of hands, but I'm assuming that folks have or will read the article at some point, right? So if you read this abstract, right, the very first sentence tells you that something is going on with Delhi's toxic air, right? And it has invited a techno-scientific scramble to understand, interpret, and provide fixes. The problem is so bad, and it's been going on forever, and perhaps it's getting worse. And that's why there has been like a techno-scientific scramble, meaning that lots of scientific and technological solutions have been proposed to understand, interpret, and provide fixes for this air pollution. Okay. Then the next sentence is telling you that this process is taking place at a particular historical conjuncture that's marked by heightened scientism, the dominance of the market, and the splintering of scientific knowledge and practices, right? So it's giving you a little bit of background why it is that there is this techno-scientific scramble. And we can see from this sentence that actually there are several reasons for it, that because we live in an age of science, which the authors are calling heightened scientism, right? And then there is the dominance of something called the market. So we have market-driven solutions, for example, for air pollution, such as purifiers, or carbon credits to clean up the environment, etc., mitigate climate change, right? And then there has also been a splintering of scientific knowledge and practices. This will become a little bit clearer later on. Okay. And then they're going on to tell us that actually techno-scientific interest in the air is varied. And what happens as a result of our focus on air pollution through techno-science is that it produces competing perspectives and policy interventions. So now they're starting to identify what the problem is, right? That they are hoping to address through this paper. Okay. And the problem that they're saying exists is that it produces that a techno-scientific approach to the air produces competing perspectives and policy interventions, right? Because, perhaps it is that there are many different technological advances that are being proposed to fix air pollution, right? And which one, do you rely on more than the other? Perhaps it is that the market is championing one thing more than the other, right? Like if the market makes, let's say, air purifiers available to all, right? And then perhaps that's the solution that's being favored. So in any case, whatever the reason is, this focus on technoscience, the authors are telling us, is problematic because it creates competition among policy interventions, right? And then they're telling us there's another problem, and that is that the state's denialism, on the other hand, so the state is constantly in denial about air pollution. We already know this, right? Complicates this problem, which techno-scientific solutions give rise to in the first place, and a push towards a national scientific project on the other. Okay, so there are two things here. The state is in denial, according to the author, but there is also a push towards a national scientific project, right, to solve the issue of air pollution. So all of these things are complicating what is already a difficult problem to solve when you take into account this one techno-scientific perspective. Okay. Then they're telling us a little bit about how this issue is framed in air pollution discourses. It's framed in a manner that papers over tensions, meaning that what it does is whatever tensions are there, they are neglected, and sutures or any breaks that exist within the techno-sciences. So they make it appear as if there is no competition, that all of technology and science is in agreement with each other, and privileges analysis and action that are abstracted from the lived experiences of the urban majority. Okay, so remember what the title is, Peopling Technoscience, right? So here is where the authors are now starting to make their argument, right? They start by telling us what is happening, why they take issue with it, and why it is happening at this particular moment in history, and what issues it creates in return, right? The first issue is that it happens in a way, techno-scientific discourse, that it makes it appear as if there are no tensions within the techno-science fraternity, and it privileges action. Government then takes action, and also analysis from other researchers, perhaps, or scientists or whatever, that are removed from the lived experiences of people who have to breathe the bad air, right? And then they make this statement which says, we trace the emergence in this article of the technosciences of air in Delhi and locate the people in it. So you can see now that after telling us what the issue is and what the consequences of the issue being this way are, they're getting to their argument. Okay, so this is a very clearly written paper where your title is kind of captures the essence of the paper, but then the abstract is also giving you lots of really good information in a very systematic way. So their main argument is that we need to locate the people in the technoscience, because what happens is when the people are removed, whatever actions happen also don't take into account how people are breathing this bad air and what their experiences of this air are. Okay. And lastly, they say that they move to a more localized and situated understanding of the air to argue that residents know air pollution in a way that is different from technosciences, right? So they're saying that first we will discuss how this came to be. How did the scientific discourse come to dominate the discourse of air pollution in Delhi? And then we will locate where the people are in this discourse. Where are the people when we're talking about the technosciences? Then we will move to a more localized understanding and a situated understanding of air and make the argument that actually it is the people who breathe this bad air and who experience it in particular ways is very different from the way that the scientists understand it. So they tell us that there is this sort of chasm or separation that exists between the two objects of this paper, the people and the sciences. Okay. And so they're making the argument that we need to pay attention to the people's experiences. Okay. And why should we do this? Right. It can just go on as it is. What do the people have to do with it anyways? If we have scientists who are solving this problem and, we have all of these technological solutions, etc., why care about? I mean, ultimately, they are doing it for the people, right? So why do we need to put the people in the into the conversation? So they argue that this is because it's critical to appreciate and engage with people and put people in technoscience if alliances and effective actions are to be forged, right? So if we are to make change in the community, then we actually need to forge alliances with the people that experience the bad air, right? So that there is some action that can be taken rather than some action that can be imposed on the people. So that is their sort of main argument. I think there was a comment. Let's just have a look at it. We generally say that we need to write in such a way that it can be understood even by a layman. Then why to use such language that makes the reach of our writing limited to a very few? So can I take this up in the questions if that's okay with you? Yes? Okay. So you can, okay, great. So you can see here that the abstract itself is giving you a lot of information, right? It's telling you what the problem is, what the paper is about, the argument that the authors are making, why they are making this particular argument, and what should be done about it. So in 250 words, they're giving us really the crux of the paper. Okay. Then you can also see what keywords they use. There's air pollution, technoscience, Delhi, urban political ecology, science and technology studies. Okay. So again, very helpful keywords, which will, in case someone was looking for a paper, arguing this or wanting to explore this tension between the people and the technoscience, then they would find this way, right? Okay. So here the paper begins, and it begins with an anecdote. And I know that several of you may have, conducted field research already, or maybe in different stages of conducting research. So forgive me if I'm sounding like I'm talking down to you. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm trying to explain it in a way that maybe those of you for whom this is their first experience with research will also understand it. Okay. So some of these things sound elementary and basic. Apologies for that. And please feel free to contribute to the discussion today. Okay. So they begin with an anecdote, and I know that they've done a lot of field work in Delhi to understand this issue, right? So this is where the data for the paper are coming from. So they begin with an anecdote where a member of something called the Help Delhi Breathe Alliance is telling them about their own experience, right? And they're saying we've run out of clean water and air, but we must stop feeling helpless and be part of a change. Listen to the experts, see the micro and macro solutions, become armed and impactful. This is our Delhi and it is our responsibility, right? So this person's statement is sort of pointing to the techno-scientific discourse itself. They're saying that we should listen to the experts and see what the micro and macro solutions are. And then there is another statement that is made. It's a quote, I think, from a paper. And the quote says that Delhi needs an air quality manager who has clearly defined mandates and powers, right? So again, somebody who can manage the air and who can, perhaps, I don't know, maybe enact some of these techno-scientific solutions, just make our air better, right? So a policy person and a techno-scientific person still know people, right? So then they have an introduction, okay? So what is the introduction for in a paper, right? The idea in the introduction, of course, is to introduce the argument that the authors are making, but also provide a little bit of context as to why the research was done, what the paper is about, why the issue is important. And then, and you can read this on your own time. I don't have, of course, the time to go over everything that's written in the paper, but, but as you read it, you will understand that they are giving you now a bit more context about what the issue exactly is. But in the introduction section, since you need to signpost, as I said, and get people hooked to, and just declare off the bat what your argument is, that should happen immediately in the paper without much delay, right? The introduction is kept sort of crisp and concise to make the case that actually this is a problem worth studying. And then it also tells you that this is how we have studied it, and this is what we are arguing, what we have found, and what we propose to do about it. Okay, so this is what the introduction section carries. Now you can see that, my way of understanding and retaining information from any paper is, of course, I also skim read a lot, and I've learned it as a skill, but after many, many years of being, a researcher, and it was very difficult for me to do in the beginning. So now what I do when I do reading is that I actually highlight things, right? Because I read a lot online somehow. And when I highlight, if you have access to Adobe, great. But I think these days there are a lot of free tools that allow you to actually, annotate your paper online itself. So you can always highlight. You can also add comments to, sentences that sound interesting, okay, or whose meaning you didn't understand, or an argument sentence, or what have you, right? Whatever helps you make sense of what the paper is talking about, okay? So here is a bit of context that they are giving us, right? And it's saying that, I'll summarize it for you, that mostly it is scientists who are regularly seen and heard. But even more than the scientists, we hear in these air pollution debates voices of activists, lawyers, and self-trained experts and entrepreneurs. They speak of the air quality and of its legal and regulatory environment, as well as the technical measures that the state should implement. So what they're doing is that all these people, right, they claim to be speaking on behalf of the public, but what they're doing is they're reproducing the scientific discourse of air pollution. Okay, why is this? And should this be happening? Okay, so they're disagreeing. They're saying that actually by reproducing this sort of epistemology, this is a word that you will come across a lot, right? And epistemology simply means what you believe, right? A way of believing. Okay, so there are positivists, then there are constructivists. You'll learn all this in your research classes. So whatever your, system of belief is, it's called an epistemology. So by reproducing this epistemology of the technosciences, and they're not actual scientists, right? They're lawyers or activists or whatever. These voices are ensuring a techno-scientific hegemony, meaning that this discourse is what is dominating the discourse on air pollution. Okay, so they've set the context up very nicely, at least I think. And then they're saying that in this context, our paper considers how this came to be. Okay, and they're then telling us, they've already told us that the relationship between air pollution in Delhi and the people is fraught. Okay, and what do they mean by fraught? Okay, why is this relationship not a good relationship between the people and the technosciences? It's because there are two reasons that they say, because the people never appear in the discourse, in the scientific discourse, and they are actually the agents who are breathing and living the air in very, very specific localities. Okay, they are then also telling us that much of the action, and what is being talked about is being talked about as what we call a small scale, meaning like at a sort of larger scale of locality. Like it's well, let me rephrase that. It's being talked about at the scale of, let's say, state or nation rather than locality, because what they're saying, or they go on to say, is that actually the problem is very, very local, okay, and therefore the solution should also be local, and that's why the people need to be included in this conversation, okay. Okay, and then they're also, they go on to tell you sort of what specifically what the different issues are that they take with this sort of hegemonic discourse, okay. And then here is one argument statement. Whether it's their main argument statement or not, I leave it to you to understand and decide. They say that our premise is that these processes prepare the contours of the debate such that first, the conversation is channeled towards increasingly narrow and sophisticated and asocial analysis. And second, it moves towards progressively larger spatial scale and neglects the everyday experiences and ideas of those who inhabit zones of anxiety, right? So I have actually belabored this point quite a bit. They're saying that the problem with techno-scientific discourse is that these analyses are often narrow, they're sophisticated, they're asocial, they're scientific, they're not taking the social into account, and they're doing it at progressively larger scales. National level pe ye kar denge, state level pe we should do this, right? Rather than the everyday, the local and localized experiences, or the localized scale at which people are experiencing these issues. Okay, and they're calling these issues zones of heightened toxicity. So this is sort of their main argument. Because, and how do you get a clue as to the fact that this is their main argument? They're saying in the next section that to develop this argument, we will then do A, B, and C. Okay, so they're telling you that this is the main argument. The reason that they're making this argument is given in this in the paragraph preceding the argument. And then after the argument, they're telling you what exactly it is that they are going to do to develop this argument further. So let me get back to the slideshow first. Okay, so you've read the introduction, and you can perhaps take a look at whatever graphs and charts and whatever other sort of data points there are in the paper, and quickly see what findings are emerging, right? You can also skip over the background perhaps and go to the results directly and to the discussion. But results and discussions are also, of course, larger, meatier sections. So you can actually come all the way to the conclusion, where what happens is that a lot of the points that are made in support of the argument are reiterated, right? So let's just have a look here. Okay. Okay. So in this particular paper, the authors, of course, are summing up everything that they are saying. And they again, they're repeating that, who is at the forefront of this conversation about air pollution. It's certainly not the people, it's either their representatives or activists or whatever, but they're again speaking in very scientific language. There are several ruptures that this creates, and it ignores the people whose experiences should be front and center. Okay, so they're reiterating the argument in this first paragraph. And then they talk about what, sort of where this, why it's important to do this research, and where this sort of argument is coming from, what is informing it, right? And so they tell you that we've actually focused on the trajectory of the debate in Delhi's air, and we've looked at, who are the stakeholders involved in these discussions, and then what are the discussions that are happening. Okay. And then they tell you that what they have particularly done is that we have shifted the attention to localizing the air, because they're arguing that the air should be localized, and why that is important in the next section. How much time do I have left, by the way? Can anyone tell me?
Yeah. Yes. Khushdeep, actually. Yeah, so actually we had 20 minutes. It's almost getting in. So if you want to wrap up sooner.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll wrap up. Okay. And then very importantly, right, once they've reiterated their argument, why they made the argument, why it's important, etc., here are also some policy solutions that are provided. Okay. So our first call is to urge the technosciences to engage with the wider debate on environmental health and public healthcare, right? So then they are laying out what solutions they are also proposing that can perhaps help address the issue that they are talking about or the argument that they are making. Okay. So what I'll tell you is that okay, you've read the abstract. That itself has told you a lot of things. Then you've read the introduction that set up the context for you, as well as told you what the main arguments are. And then you can skim over the results to see what the findings are, whether the findings are interesting, etc. And then the conclusion will reiterate the entire paper for you. Okay. But in a good paper, we see that actually all of the sections are connected with each other, right? So each research question is systematically answered in the results section, right? Often question one will have like let's say a quantitative paper. It's easier to understand. They're a bit more sort of methodical. Well, not methodical. They're a bit more, I guess, formulaic in their writing, right? So when you look at the results section, the question that should come to your head is, have they actually answered their research question? Or have they actually given us results or evidence in support of the argument that they are making? That's the purpose of the results section of a paper, right? And it's the place where evidence is presented. And in the discussion, what happens is that this evidence is then, the quality of this evidence is then compared, first of all, well, not the quality, the findings are compared with other findings that exist on the same question, right? There'll be many papers on air pollution. Who else is making this argument? Okay. How are they making this argument? Are they making it differently? And if they're making it differently, why are they making it differently? How are we in conversation with this other argument or these other arguments that are being made about this same topic? Do we agree with them? Do we disagree with them? Why or why not, right? And if we disagree with them, then is our own argument critiquing them in a way that we are moving the field forward, that we are moving that we are answering the research question perhaps a little bit better or a little bit more than they are answering, right? And then the discussion section will also often have, the limitations of the research and what the authors were not able to do, or whether, let's say, something was missing from the study. And then lastly, it will also have policy recommendations that are made. And then the conclusion ties everything together. Okay. So this is broadly how you read a research paper. But as I said, there is really no sort of formulaic way to read a paper except to read lots of papers and, get in the habit of reading research. For me, again, I'll wrap up with this. What works is highlighting. Okay. And I also often, when I highlight, I also annotate, like I will add a comment here or whatever. Or helpfully, what I do more and more is that I will have like a Google Doc open, right? Like, let me show you. When I teach my class, and I have a terrible memory. So what I do is when I make their PowerPoints, I actually write down a summary of the paper as the paper goes. Okay, so let me just show you quickly. And we can also share some of this, I guess, later on, right? If we don't have time, because I definitely don't want to take away time from the Q&A. Okay, so let's see. We have research ethics. Okay, so this is how I make my class read articles, right? Like I'll give them a reading, and then I'll actually frame questions according to how the reading is organized, and then I'll have them answer these questions one by one in the context of the reading. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Okay. And this is from a paper by Rahil Dhatiwala, and it's talking about, insider, outsider ethics in the field and positionality and those things. So I often begin by where the author begins, right? Like, what are they talking about? What are the particular dilemmas, for example, that she discusses? What are the challenges she describes? How does she deal with? So that helps me summarize the paper, right? In a way, and it also helps me retain a lot of the information. And I can always go back to a particular point in my own summary if I then want to find that point in the paper and revisit it if I have not understood it, or if I want to connect one idea to another. When you take notes, right, in the form of questions or just simply in the form of sentences, then you're also able to connect ideas with each other. There's a very important point that I think is made on the slide, that slide that was shared with you, that you should always also take down any quotes which are interesting to you, right? Because often quotes in qualitative research, at least, are data that are coming from the people that then help you assess whether they're reflecting, they're presented as evidence in favor of the argument, or they're reflecting, or they're doing something to analyze the argument, etc. Okay. And then there's like several other things which I think you can go over in the PowerPoint by yourself. Let me just stop here very quickly. I'll just say that in addition to arguments, you should also be looking for counter arguments. Often these will be in the discussion section and also in your lit review or background section, right? Because that's what helps set up the context for the paper. And then, of course, there are main ideas and sub ideas, which I think will become clear as you read the paper and as you read other papers. Okay, so let me stop here. Sorry, I think I didn't do a very good job and focus too much on how to read the paper and the abstract. So my time management was all off. Okay, let me stop.
Thank you, Dr. Khushdeep. I think it was a wonderful discussion, and especially by showing the paper, it was really helpful. So now we'll move to the interactive student panel. So I invite our discussants to take over, and we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for the interactive students panel, following which we'll take questions from all the participants.
Great.
So over to you, Nityashri and Parvati. Please take over and continue with the discussion.
So now first of all, your presentation from the beginning till the end, you can see there are a lot of explanations.
Sorry, can you just be a bit loud? I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Can you just be a bit loud? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is it okay? Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So first of all, I would like to tell you this from the beginning till the end of the session. To be very frank, I read your paper twice. Because at the very first reading, I can able to understand what you're trying to tell me, like as a reader. And then the next reading, I can able to understand what you're trying to bring for the relevance of your research. So in that way, I felt like twice reading is very important for all the researchers. So accordingly, from your perspective, as well as your complete explanation over the paper, I can understand like how a researcher's perspective towards a particular topic should be. So, ma'am, I have few questions, like a bit of clarification, I can say. So from you, as well as if any other can able to give up with this, I'll be very happy. So ma'am, first you talked about this kind of arguments.
Sorry, say that again.
So I would like to ask you, ma'am, yes, ma'am. So in what ways, can misinterpretation of dense academic language, even your work, it starts with the dense academic language. So I'm asking, in what ways can misinterpretation of dense academic language lead to flawed research conclusion? Because in a lot of presentation in Bible ways, we can able to hear that from experts, there are certain flaws in your research conclusion. So in that way, I'm very curious to know about how can this be prevented, accordingly, from your perspective.
Right. So I think your question is that often academic language is dense, and I think somebody else had asked this question as well. So perhaps one can have a flawed interpretation of what the authors are trying to say, right? So what's the way to prevent this? There is actually no way to prevent this. You just have to make these mistakes. And I think all of us as researchers perhaps have made these mistakes when we are interpreting a text, right? the only way that one can learn to read and write is by practice, right? The more you read, and the more you read more of a certain literature, the more you will be able to understand what it is that is being said, right? In qualitative research, especially for a lot of us who work in conflict, for example, we often write in a way that is implicit, right? Like our arguments are explicit, I think, but the way that we write, there's a lot of subtext in the writing, right? So there is always the possibility of misinterpreting the things that somebody like me is saying. But then there is also this context of, why are you reading the article? Who is reading the article? What do they want to do with with this particular piece of writing, right? There's intentional, of course, misinterpretation. But I think what you're saying is that what if we just don't understand the argument? You read it, you reread it, right? If a paper is clearly written, such as this pollution paper, it will be clear. I mean, it'll at some point become clear to you what argument is being made. And then you also have other research, right? That either supports these arguments or refutes them. Or, at least tells you that, look, the data are saying this, right? So, for example, to say that the people are not involved in air pollution discourses, okay? This is something which is a bit of a truism, as they say. It's a fairly obvious thing. If you just look at, let's say, conferences that are held every pollution season in Delhi. Okay, who are we hearing from? Right? Do we know that a person who lives in, let's say, Bhalswa or near Bhalswa experiences the air pollution? Okay. Do we know the experiences of, let's say, people who live in Nizamuddin West and how they experience air pollution, right? The body of the research itself will tell you there is a reason, right, that there is a body of research and not just like one research paper or two research papers. So it's really very difficult to get an argument wrong, okay? But if you do, because of the language or whatever, there'll be several clues in the paper that will help you understand what arguments are being made, and there'll be other literature that will help you assess, whether you are interpreting somebody's argument correctly or not, okay? I understand that dense language is a problem, but it's a problem that we need to learn to embrace, right? Let me answer the question of the woman who asked it earlier. Every discipline has their language, right? And I agree that to some extent this language is exclusionary, it's not accessible. It's absolutely true, And look at who is also doing academia, right? This discussion is tied to sort of a larger discussion around like caste and class and ethnicity and whatever. Who are the people who are reading and writing, right? So there are a lot of issues with creating true and genuine access, right? And really disseminating knowledge in a way that people understand. And I think more and more researchers are trying in different ways, right? Like, for example, by publishing the paper or at least popular writing in non-English media, right? In vernacular media or whatever. And also inviting the public to engage with, journal articles and things like that through various fora. So, but the real problem, the problem still remains that, much of this, like anthropological writing to me also was very, very inaccessible when I started, right? And so geography as well, right? There's a lot of critical literature in geography that, brings in questions of power and this and that. And it was very difficult for me to understand. And I came from a public health background, right? So it was very difficult and something which was very new for me. But over the course of time, because I did a lot of reading, I banged my head and asked questions, tried to understand why is it that this is being said, who else has said it, who has negated it, then it sort of starts to become clear to you with experience what, a certain body of work is trying to say. So that, I don't know if that's a good answer to the question, but really this is something that will come from experience, and you will, make mistakes. And hopefully, and see, that's why we also have peer networks, right, in academia who support each other and who engage in conversations with each other, right? So it's also always okay to ask when you don't understand something. That's the way to learn, right? So, yeah.
Okay, now let me quickly interfere and say two things. One, there was a request from one of the participants to share the rest of the slides so they can read while whatever was not presented. And another thing, to all the participants, you can start asking your questions in the chat box while the student panel is discussing. So we can take it up along with the discussion as well. So please start posting any questions you have, and we can, of course, take questions you want to directly ask after the student panel as well, but please start sending questions. So yeah, please continue, Parvati and Nitishri. Over to you again.
Just to confirm if I'm audible at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would say this question that I have is a little more of a personal challenge, and it kind of talks about how when we're reading, the difference between reading to understand and reading to engage. While because a lot of the times personally when I'm engaging with academic literature, there are a lot of times where I've understood the primary arguments, I've been able to kind of understand, like we talked about the counter arguments, the argumentation that is taking place in the paper. But I find it hard to retain arguments and connect them to other texts or real world issues. So, what would your advice be on training, not just to read, but to internalize and critically evaluate these theories and research arguments that we've been studying?
Right, that's a good question, and I'm also, see, I'm a professor, but and I think Dr. Sreekala will agree with me. Sometimes I still struggle to understand and retain a lot of the argumentation that is done, and connect ideas as well. I think a lot of us are not born like brilliant and with very high, we are all in that bell curve, so we all have to work hard. So to answer your question, see, you first read to understand, right? And you will read not just one paper on pollution, but perhaps 10 different papers, right? And you'll first read to understand all of these papers. And once you sort of master, let's say, the reading about a particular topic, right? And you know what's out there, then it's not that somebody will give you what questions to ask, right? You will yourself start to ask certain questions. Okay, why is, let's say, why is caste talked about in a certain way, in a certain, as I said, epistemology, right? Or why do positivists, ask questions the way that they do? Okay, whereas constructivists ask questions in a different way. So first you have to understand what positivism is and what kinds of questions are asked, what constructivism is and what kinds of questions are asked, right? Only then you can begin to engage. When you read a lot, right, retention happens for a lot of us, for me especially, with writing. Okay, and that's why when I'm reading a text, I also, and nowadays, because you have so much technology, you just open up a doc and make notes for each text that I read, right? For a 20-page text, I at least have 20 pages of notes. Okay, I also highlight a lot, right? Because highlighting helps me understand when I go back and revisit the article that actually I thought this point was important to highlight for whatever reason. It could be something that I didn't know and that I really liked. Okay, it could be something that I thought was central to the argument or to my own question that I had about the reading for whatever reason. Okay, and then when I'm making notes, I'm automatically connecting, writing down the main thoughts of the article, but also putting in my own thoughts, right? And then when I go back and look at my thoughts, I'll maybe have a thought like, why is it that peopling is not happening in the techno sciences? What does the author mean by peopling? Okay, or why do they talk about the people only from this particular lens, right? What about the people that are not being talked about, right? Like, do we ever do this kind of peopling? Who is this public, right? Like, this would be a question that would come to mind. A very basic question. Is it, even if we make it a very, very localized scale, who is this public? It is public that has access to a researcher also in some ways, right? So many people are still being left out. So these are all ideas which come to me like when I'm writing down my notes. And then when I'm going back to read the paper a second time, a third time, I will then, these will become sort of my critiques maybe for the paper, right? Or I will go and look for them in the results section or the discussion section. Like have the authors discussed who is this public, right? Why are certain publics not included? Like are disabled people included in this discourse, right? In this emphasis on peopling technoscience or hearing from the people. Are transgender people in, these kinds of questions will automatically come to mind. Okay. So when you're reading, you start to understand. Then when you're writing, you start to connect your own questions with things that you read in the text, with things that are missing from the text. And then, you bring in other sort of papers, you follow similar exercises. You'll see it's like when you analyze, your qualitative notes, themes start to emerge as well, right? From this note taking only. Or, at least like broad sort of questions start to emerge or whatever. And that's how you are engaging or you begin to engage with the text, right? Now, when it comes to critical questions, okay, first of all, we need to understand what criticality is, right? We use the term a lot, critical this, critical that. Critical questions are essentially questions that ask why questions are asked in a certain way, right? Like, why are we asking the question of the relationship, let's say, between hypertension and obesity in this way, right? Rather than asking what are the social structures which are impacting hypertension and obesity, right? So when you ask questions which take into account like social structures or power structures, that's when your sort of
Critical
question or your
examination comes
lens
in.
becomes
Yeah.
critical, right? So when you understand through reading and writing, and then you engage by as you're writing, you're asking questions, and your own thoughts, and you're seeing whether those questions are answered in one text or many texts, and then you start to ask the critical questions. Could I have asked this question in a better way? Okay, if I had asked this question in a critical way, what is the answer I would have received? Could I have engaged with a particular theory in a better way if I had asked this question critically instead of just asking it linearly, right? And then you will, this is sort of how the process works for me. As I said, people read and write in their own different ways, right? But the key to it is to actually read together and also write and take notes, right? And in a way, like how you would do with field notes, right? And then you sort of apply the same sort of method of analysis to your own, article or reading notes and connect them with the arguments that are made, etc. So that's what works for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, a lot of take backs. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, yes, ma'am. So I have this question, ma'am. So to ask you, like, ma'am, in this ever-evolving landscape of like academic research, so particularly as a researcher, I always feel this in this interdisciplinary and cultural studies. How can a researcher like effectively balance the need for theoretical depth? So with the demand for a practical applicability, because given that researchers often oscillate between the intellectual abstraction and the real world impact. So how does what do you think about how a researcher can navigate the tension between maintaining methodological rigor, I could say in that way, I guess. So methodological rigor and making research accessible to the wider audience, like for the case of social relevance.
I think you're asking two different questions, right? Your first question was...
I combined it together.
Yeah, so how does one, I guess, negotiate this tension between theoretical depth and public accessibility, right?
Yeah.
Like,
do I want practical accessibility? Yes.
Practical accessibility. And then your second question was methodological rigor and how do we ensure methodological rigor while also being accessible to read and right to all audiences? Is that correct? That was your question. Okay. So
yes,
I honestly don't think that we should make that it should be either or, right? When it comes to the first question. you engage with theory to answer a particular kind of question, right? Or to explain a particular kind of process. Okay. And you also do, like for example, the paper that was assigned is actually a great example of how to bring together theory as well as grounded research, right? And have very, very practical implications for how actions can be taken on air pollution and addressing the problem of air pollution, right? So it is not that one has to only do practical policy-oriented research in order to be relevant, although the current political moment makes you think that actually, yeah, this is maybe the case, right? There's a lot of emphasis on STEM and on like finding solutions, right? Which I mean, sure, we should be finding solutions to lots of problems in society, right? And this is the reason that we engage in research in different ways. But to engage in theoretical research, right? Or to engage with theory is not to say that I can't then find a problem, a solution for a particular problem, right? Like it may not be a scientific or practical policy solution to a problem, but I would say that a lot of, theory building has actually given us great tools to, for example, talk about caste, right? Or talk about gender, or talk about sexuality, So is this research, it's not practicable, right? But it's very useful research because, we need to understand that perhaps our way of talking about caste and gender and, sexuality was very, very exclusive and damaging and violent, right? To lots of people. And so theory has made very important contributions, right? Think about capital or class, and the way that, much of that discourse has shaped like movements in India, right? And around the world is really important. Okay. But it's also like, let's look at it in the context of the US, what's happening. So maybe this has, I don't know, it must have also happened in India. I'm not entirely educated about it, but in the context of the US, let's say a lot of this LGBTQ, all the new sort of discourse or the new language that you started hearing, right, came from actually very, very good theoretical research, right? So critical race theory, for example, became the basis for a lot of policy action that was taken in schools to make curricula more inclusive, right, for people who didn't fall in the binary of gender or whatever, right? This idea of intersectionality also came from theoretical work, but then it started to be applied practically in high school education even, right? To make sure that everybody felt welcome and included. Of course, now we're living in a very, very particular political moment where, these things are not given. And, then of course the market also shapes, let's be real, right? Our education, our research incentives, right? So why is suddenly there a lot of interest in gender and STEM, for example? Like, why is it happening at this moment? We have to ask this question also, right? Why is there so much technological discourse when it comes to air pollution and not people discourse? Because the market is also, shaping this research in various ways. So I think that it really depends on what you want to do, right? If you want to ask a question which, necessitates more engagement with theory, then do that. But do that in a way that you do it well, you articulate it convincingly, as you would, more practical research which engages policy, right? I don't think that we need to make this distinction in this way, right? And then the second thing is also that, there's a lot of emphasis, like maybe not so in qualitative research, well, in grounded theory, right? We believe that we actually produce theory from the ground, right? And we even ask our research questions from the ground. Okay. So a lot of people get sort of, scared of this word theory, and they're always looking for some sort of theoretical framework with which to inform their research question and, write their research proposal or whatever. I personally didn't have that kind of training. I think a lot of us in this room would not also have had that kind of training. For me, there were several helpful theoretical contexts right? That then helped me ask research questions. And as I went on the field, the question changed, right? New theoretical sort of insights emerged, and it was truly a very grounded theoretical approach for me. So I was not limited by looking for that perfect theory before I went into the ground. Okay, so that's that. Whether my research has any practical implications or not, I don't know. Time will tell. The people will tell who read it. The second question, you should never sacrifice methodological rigor. In any scenario, there should never be any sacrifice of methodological rigor. It should always be maintained, whether it's quantitative research or it's qualitative research. If you're trying to be accessible to a larger audience and you're writing for a public, okay, which is not academic, you will still have the same methodological rigor. There are actually lots of really good books that have been written. For example, let's say about crime and money in Indian politics that are written from a very popular sort of, in a way that anybody can read. They're not like super academic, super jargony, but they still maintain the methodological rigor, meaning that they still talk about the data with which they are making the argument that actually crime pays in Indian politics or something else, right? There's no sacrifice of one or the other. It's just that you may have difficulty translating so much of our academic production is done in English, right? And there are often not words with which to explain one thing or another in another language. Like for example, I often think of, so when I was in Kashmir, right, people would talk about the Salab or the flood. Okay, now the English word is flood, but the Urdu word is Salab, right? And there is just a difference in feeling between the two. So what I did was that I actually kept as much of the original language of my interlocutors as possible, especially when I quoted them, right? And then I wrote my articles and interpreted whatever. Even when I translated, that was I translated a few of my articles in Punjabi. And so my effort was to keep their words theirs, and then I provide a translation, and then I work in I write the same thing in Punjabi. So I think the real difficulty lies in finding the language other than English, right, to communicate your research. But methodological rigor should always remain, no matter whether you write for a public audience or for an academic audience. That should not change. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So we're also running short of time, so I'll quickly
Thank
to
you.
the participants' questions as well. Before that, Dr. Khushdeep, I think you've shared the screen where we're seeing the instead of the presentation screen, we're seeing ourselves like double projected. So
Oh,
could you check into it?
okay. I don't know exactly what I should be doing. Sorry, I'm technologically a bit challenged. Should I stop sharing my screen? Will that help?
I think maybe, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so can I go ahead to the
Yes,
question?
please. Yes.
So there are two questions regarding reading long texts. So
Hmm.
there's one question from Ramia and another from Anshuman. So I'll be asking them together. So one is about how do you approach more longer texts, like dense and longer books for your research, especially when you're working in a time-bound manner. And the other
Yes.
question is regarding sometimes we have to engage with lengthy texts of 20, 30 pages, with
Right.
sometimes less or sometimes no subheadings. And we get lost in what the author is trying to say. And he's also asked, while engaging with these texts, it's not possible to always finish the paper at one go. And you have to read it like in parts for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So
yeah, very good question. Sorry?
So the participant has said, I face difficulty to continue from where I left from. What would be your suggestion while dealing with such long texts that have very few subheadings? And it also, there's one small thing that I also like to add, like something I tell my students often is to, when they have a longer text, I tell them to ask questions to the text and keep noting all the questions they have, like keep
Exactly.
doing
Right.
it.
Right.
So it could combine that and if what's the method that you would suggest to them? Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also my method as I was trying to show you. I just write questions, right? And I'm looking for the answers to this question in the papers that I'm reading, right? To read books, first of all, there is a really great resource out there, which is called a book review, okay? So often when you, let's say, search a book, okay, you will find lots of book reviews about any book that is written. And often, like a lot of times they'll say similar things, but they'll also sort of sketch out the field for you in different ways. So book reviews are a great tool to actually read books. I mean, to let's say you have a class. I had a class once which required reading one book a week. Okay, and it was totally crazy. So we would read the book reviews, and then some books were more interesting than others, so we would find ways to finish them. But book reviews are a great way to read books, to at least get sort of a sense of what the books are about and what arguments are being made. If you can't read anything else, right, at least read the introduction. The introduction will tell you a lot of great things, and also sort of the main argument of the book, how the chapterization is done, what each chapter is trying to tell you, and then either policy recommendations or what the critiques of the field or how the author has moved the argument forward. All the things that a paper would tell you as well, right? So an introduction is a really, really important thing to read when at least trying to like let's say you have a class and you haven't had the time. So book review as well as an introduction. Okay. How do you read a longish text, whether it's an article or a book? See, again, what you do is you start, of course, by reading the introduction, right? Then you either find the piece interesting, you delve into it deeply, and you sort of make notes for it and whatever, or you find it boring, and that's when you start to skim, right? And when you're skimming, you'll see sort of the main, there'll be something that catches your attention. Okay, it may not be the main crux of the argument or the main finding, but something, like for instance, there'll be sometimes very striking findings, right? Like for example, that I'm trying to think of an example. I'll give you from quantitative research since I'm teaching research. Like, so a striking finding will be something like the child sex ratio in Haryana in 2025 is still terrible after Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, right? There'll be something that you will find interesting, okay? And that will stay with you. And it, again, may not be related to the question that the author is answering or whatever. So you skim through like background. So I think a lot of us just sort of skip. But then the results we skim through, something stays with us. We make a note of it. And then that thing that stays with us when we go to the discussion. If there is some discussion of it, we make a note of it, and then we get sort of something from a particular paper, let's say about the child sex ratio and why it is in this way or whatever. Then we take it to the next reading with us, or that's the thing that we take away from that particular reading. So and if a reading is interesting, then I really think that you will make the time for it and you will read it in parts or whatever, right? But the way again to retain what you're reading is to make notes, right? That way, when you let's say stop reading a text today, pick it up 1 week later, you look at your notes, you'll say, okay, this is where I stopped. This is a summary of what I read, and now I can begin reading here, right? This is why it's really, and when you write notes, you're obviously not writing like perfect notes and long notes, right? You're just doing like short bulleted points, okay? That will tell you exactly what the text was about, what stayed with you, etc. So, I mean, yeah, that's like sort of my suggestion. Book reviews, introduction. I'll just say that we are constantly as professors dealing with AI now in our classrooms. And sometimes it's not a bad thing, right? Because lots of undergrads will use AI to, drill down like these very heavy, dense papers and make sense of them. And they'll also use it as a writing tool, right? So I'm not saying that you should rely on AI because AI lies to you a lot. But, like for example, Adobe, I was seeing the other day, has this AI assistant where you actually, get a breakdown of what the main arguments in the text are and whatever. So for people who have a hard time reading, I think that's not really a terrible thing to do, is take some help of these AI tools that are available to you and then read the text for yourself and, see, oh, is this the argument that I was also thinking about while I was reading the paper or whatever? They are there, right? And they are there for you to use judiciously, not just, unsparingly and without thinking, sort of, and you certainly shouldn't let them shape your thinking in any way, but you should use because they exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I'll quickly read out one more question from the chat box, and then two people have raised hands, so I'll get to you both immediately after this. So the question is, the research in academic writing and literature, assuming you're a literature student who asked this, is not very simple or methodological, unlike scientific research where you can conduct experiments and then discuss. How to build an argument, I assume what you're asking is what is under scrutiny in real world through literature or the world of literature. Like this is something we face in class also every day. Like, science research is definitely different from what we all do. A lot of us who are art students. So how do we build an argument and connect it with what's happening in the real world? Yeah.
I mean, first of all, non-scientific research, if you're calling humanities or, social science research, that is actually also very scientific, right? We have a method to what we do, we have a research question, we have a lit review, we have to justify why it is that we want to ask that research question, and we decide our method. Like why did I want to do an ethnography in Kashmir, right? Or why would somebody choose to do, like, let's say, case selection and then comparison? Or why would somebody choose to do, interviewing or archival research or whatever? So it's always methodical. It's not that there is not a method involved, right? There is always a method involved. What we call as science and non-science, of course, this debate will continue. But what you're asking is,
how to build an argument was the question in that case.
Yeah. Are you asking specifically through like literature in general or the field of literature, like literary writing or reading? It's not clear to me. But anyways, let me answer the question like as I have understood it. So, your literature review is actually a very, very critical thing. And I think you have had a session where they have taught you how to, like, the sort of, they've given you the tools to do a lit review.
So, it keeps changing, but the lit review is really your tool to identify sort of what we call gaps in the literature, but also what knowledge previously exists and how we can contribute to it. And by contributing to it, I also mean how we can critique it, right? And we can talk to it and say, okay, well, this person didn't take this into consideration. Can I actually ask a critical question that takes this into consideration and builds on their arguments? You're not always identifying gaps, but you are also identifying some gaps and you're situating your research in those gaps, or you're situating your research in conversation with other research, right? So when you do your lit review, you actually, through your lit review, get a sense of what kinds of questions have been asked, how they have answered, the pertinent debates in the field, and what kinds of questions remain to be asked, or can those questions be asked in a different way, right? Not necessarily a better or a worse way, but a different way. And then what will that tell us? Okay. There is really no other way to do this, and peer review is again a very, very important thing here, because when your peers, whether it's your professors or your friends, or other people in your academic network read your work, they will be able to point you towards something like, let's say, that you have missed in the body of literature that exists, right? Or they will be able to say, look, this question does not go far enough in addressing what it is that you want to study, or it has been asked in this way before. Why don't you actually take this approach or whatever? So peer review and lit review both are your best friends in trying to understand what type of question to ask. And see, it's an iterative process. You won't just come up with the perfect question when you read lots of literature also and make meticulous notes, etc. It will have to go through many, many iterations before you have the right question. And that's why you do have a peer review. Okay. So.
Yeah. So now we'll move to the two people who raised.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Am I audible?
I think it's my, hold on.
We can hear Sreekala. I think Khushdeep, maybe there is some issue with the speaker at your end.
I think the headphones also kind of disconnected.
Yeah.
Or the AirPods.
Are we audible to you now? You're on mute.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. So two participants had raised hands. Indubala Keshavan, if you could quickly ask your question. Please unmute yourself and ask question.
Hello. Thank you, Sreekala. Nice seeing you after a long time. And thank you, Dr. Khushdeep. It has been very insightful to listen to you. and for all the tips and methodical way of reading the text has been so useful. Thank you. I have two questions and one comment. The first one is what I struggle is often we think of reading as a very individual practice. Of course, it is. But in the process of reading, do you discuss? Do you talk to your peer, or do you write down something? And how has it been useful for you um, to see reading not as an individual practice, but also continuously discuss about it? That is one. And how do you contain reading? Like sometimes you're often influenced to read more and more and not develop anything out of the previous reading, and it kind of stops there, like you're full of having read text but not having argumented anything out of it. That is
Yeah.
and the other part of my question is, how can one supplement academic reading with non-academic reading, or um, it can be anything, watching a video or a film, and so to kind of digest this hardness of academic texts. That's something that I want to learn from you. And one comment that I found, that I thought to share with you is, sometimes I find reading a text along with the introduction to an edition, like say for example a journal introduces the 5 or 6 papers that they are having in a special issue, and for me the reading of the introduction has been like the eye opener, like it kind
Yes, absolutely.
of everything, and you don't have to go for a lot of texts, like in the same what do you say, the keywords or under the same titling. So
Yeah.
I found very useful. What are the other things that you learned on the way of like doing a lot of these readings? Yeah. Some tips like
Yeah.
this. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So see, special issues actually have introductions, right? And they'll introduce the articles, but I think other sort of journal issues don't. So, introductions are obviously very, very important to read for a, edited volume or a special issue or whatever. One thing which also answers the previous question, actually, more and more researchers are trying to now make their research accessible, right? And so way that a lot of us do that is we do a lot of like popular media writing, so we have short pieces in the newspapers, which actually, and this has become a common practice for like more sort of econ or quantity type research, because we are also living in the age of data journalism. So for instance, every time there's an election, right? There's a lot of like political science literature out there that talks about voting behavior, how women vote, how migrants vote, etc., etc. And you'll find that when election season comes, right, all of these articles make their way into the newspaper as newspaper stories. Similarly, I've been reading a lot about environment and the environmental discourse, etc. And so these pieces are actually a really, really helpful way of getting what is contained in like a theoretical idea which some academic propounded, or some findings that somebody had. So they're really great. They're 1,000 words. They're very crisp. They'll discuss the results. There's no like deep jargon or whatever, but they give you a great summary, and they also make sort of their own arguments about why this piece is good, or what utility it has, etc. So always look for those pieces. Okay. And as I said, a lot of academics write publicly, in newspapers, in various like magazines like India Forum or whatever. And I think Kash can, and I, of course, I'm happy to contribute to this, can provide you like a list of these resources as well, right? The second thing is I find reading with my peers to be just immensely rewarding and important, because of the comment that you were making, that I can read and read and read and yet not come up with an argument or even a critique. So it really helps me to read with my peers. But I'm also, as I said, I'm not very smart. I have to work very hard. So I also have to give a reading my own time, and I have to make my notes and first understand sort of the language and the argument and everything before I engage in a discussion with my peers, right? So everybody who is connected to an institution hopefully has access to scientific talks, right, that happen, whether in the social sciences or in the hard sciences. where faculty, students will all present their research. And I advise all of you to go to as many of these as you can, because first of all, they give you access to writers and academics, and second of all, they're a great way to discuss somebody's research and also bring in some of these questions, right? Not only like questions about their research, but also questions about how research is done and who is doing it, etc. In conversation, right? So any research talk that you have, of an author whose work you're interested in and which is accessible to you, you should attend it. Okay, that also makes a way in which you can converse with your peers. And I think lots of, in my university, for example, there are student groups who get together. They have like a sort of, not a book club, but just a reading sort of. First of all, nobody reads. The people who read nowadays are the people who actually have like a sort of a reading club or whatever. So they get together once a week. They'll all read one text together, then they'll share their notes about it. And when they compare notes, they'll understand, oh, you were thinking about it from this perspective, whereas I was thinking about it from this perspective. So I'll give you a very quick example. We all had a author come to our university who wrote this book, The Day I Became a Runner, right? So she was citing how she's also a film critic. So she was citing how she uses popular media like film to make the argument that she is making. And she talked about the film Lagan. Or sorry, somebody asked her the question of why she hadn't included Chak De India in her, in her selection of films. So all of us think of Chak De India as this like very motivational story, right? Of these women who, win a medal for India and their individual stories, whatever. She said, I think it's the story of a lonely Muslim man, right? So it stayed with me because I never thought about it that way, but that came out in this conversation that was happening. So people will have different reads of different texts, but you have to find a way to get together, which, very few people have the time for these days and whatever. But as students, it's the luxury, it's, something you still have the luxury of doing. And then you just compare your notes, talk about the reading, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it. And of course, attend as many of these talks as possible. And I forgot like what your, yeah. So you can keep on reading, right? And still not come up with an argument, which is fine. It happens all the time. I think it has happened to all of us. I can't think of anybody who has come up with an argument after reading in the first iteration, right? So you try, right? And you try to make an argument by asking a question rather than an argument statement first, right? And often your argument comes with, like, for me, my clear argument came after I had actually done the research, okay? As I was writing my dissertation, when I wrote my proposal, I had a like fairly concrete argument, but not quite as good as the argument that I was making after I had done my research. And that happens for a lot of people. So, your argument should be not, well, ask questions, right? Write down these questions that are triggered as you are reading the text, and then see what kinds of arguments you can make from these questions that come to your mind. Okay, that's like sort of one trick how to do it. And then rely on your peers. Okay, talk to your peers, talk to your professors, ask them, say, I read this text, I really didn't think that I could ask a question or frame an argument from reading it, right? And they'll tell you, they'll direct you, right? But as I said, remember that it may not be your own unique argument that you are able to make from reading a text or several texts, but you'll at least be able to ask a question, right? Or several questions. And when you do, then you'll see that with time and with more reading and whatever, that you will at least be able to frame an argument statement from those questions that you ask. But oftentimes you will be able to make the cleaner argument only after you have done your research. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Indu. That was a very valid point that you raised as well, as reading an individual activity. Like, we always see reading as an individual activity, but I feel academic reading becomes complete only with discussions and conversations. And like I always tell my students, write any and every idea that comes to your mind, write. Type, write whatever works, but put it down, because otherwise we are not moving towards an argument.
Yeah, and it becomes boring after a point to read and not discuss. It's like too mind-boggling and not productive at all after a point. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Now, there's one more participant, David, who had raised hand. So please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you, Hushi ma'am, for your insightful session. And also, I thank the KashfInitiative for giving such a great platform for young scholar like me to go through the session that you have uploaded in your YouTube. And my questions, some are already answered, but I wanted to consider it and then try to ask again. So first, I have been struggling, to connect the ideas that I have read in one paper and with the another papers that you also talk about some part of it. So how I would connect, when I for one particular topics I read one particular articles, and after that I am go to another articles, and then I'm struggling, to connect those ideas and put down into, synthesis that we used to call it, say, synthesis of the ideas or from different papers that I have struggled a lot. And the second question is, when we are trying to plan or write one articles, the gaps is within us, first the gaps we conceive. But when we are going through the literature review or reading of the existing literature, we find out that our gap that we have in our mind is already filled up. So in that situation, what steps should we take? Do we need to change the themes or topic that we are trying to write, or what should we do in such situation? So these two questions I want to raise. Thank you.
Uh, these are such thought-provoking questions, and you only think about them when somebody asks you. So, David, first of all, we all struggle with this, right? It's something I think that any serious scholar will go through, is trying to engage with texts and ideas. So it's okay. I think for me, the way that I started to draw connections between literatures was, first of all, by seeing how other people had done it, right? Because I was certainly not the first person to be asking a question about, how people belong. Okay. So let's say that I read two texts about belonging. Okay. And then I read, like, let's say a review paper, or I don't know, a critique of, let's say I read two books and I read a critique of those two books, okay, in a book review or whatever. Then I see how has some other person connected the ideas that these two authors are talking about, right? And then I start to think about, what a good way is that I might be able to connect two ideas together, right? So you actually learn from what somebody else has done out there, right? Um, um, and let me think a little bit. Yeah. So questions will arise in your mind, for example, like when you're reading, right, about, like, let's say, why is this author making this particular argument? Has somebody else made some other argument? And then you go and look for that other argument, right? So in that sense, you're connecting two pieces of literature together, like by asking these types of questions. You might ask a question that says something like, oh, could this have been studied in a better way, right? Or if I don't study it from the lens of geography, let's say, can I study it from the lens of political science, right? So how are political sciences looking at these problems? Political scientists looking at this one problem versus geographers versus anthropologists or whatever, right? So in different disciplines, like, the same problem would have been addressed in different ways, right? So one good way to establish then connection between writing is to see how, like, let's say some other discipline has done it, okay? And when you do that, I think it'll become clear to you how connections are made, right? So for example, a lot of sociologists talk about social behaviors, right, and social structures. But as a geographer, I am concerned with how these social structures are arranged in society, right? Like, so for example, we know that there are caste arrangements, but how are these caste arrangements happening, right? Like, where do people of a certain caste live? Where do certain other people live? And then how do they interact with each other? That where question comes from geography, although it also is asked by social scientists, but just trying to, give you a simple example. So by looking at like, how different disciplines, for example, have approached like a same question, you might be able to see how connections are being made. And then, as I said, people would have read like, let's say, two different works and written a review about them or something. Or, their research, like if you read this pollution paper that was assigned, it very clearly demonstrates that, there was this school of thinking and then there was this school of thinking. And now we are actually questioning both of these schools of thinking and coming up with a third way of thinking, right? So it is, again, like much of this comes from reading and writing only. But, I guess these are some ways to sort of begin thinking about how to connect ideas. So look at other literatures, look at what other people have written about something that you are struggling to find the connection with. That was your first question. I forgot what your second question was. And Sreekala, if you have something to add to this, please do.
The second question is, we have a research gap in our mind before going through a literature review, that pre-plan of a particular topics. But when we start
You have
reading,
a pre-plan of a particular topic, okay?
yes,
Yes.
we have a research gap. So when we started reading
A
the
research
existing
gap.
literature,
Okay.
the
Right.
gap that we have in our mind is already filled up by another
Yes,
scholar or
yes,
author. So,
yes.
so
Yes. So that is why, in critical, I guess critical scholars take this approach that actually we're not filling any gaps, right? We are building on other people's research and we are borrowing from other people's research, right? So we are situating our research in conversation with, or, in research that already exists, rather than filling some sort of gap. I think we would be naive to think that we are only thinking about the thing that we are thinking about. Okay. Unless, like, I mean, it's easier to do in like the hard sciences, for example, or it's easier to do if your topic is very, very niche. So, for example, in my case, I was working with the Kashmiri Sikhs, but I know there are two other people at least who are working with, the Kashmiri Sikhs and trying to understand their belonging. It just happens that one person was a historian, so she was asking questions of history and I'm a geographer, so I was asking questions of belonging, but from a very geographic lens. So your disciplinary lens, in that sense, should aid you and help you in understanding how you will situate your research, right? In the context of other research that has been done. Okay. So I feel that I think it's time for us to move from like saying that we are addressing a particular gap rather, and saying that we are situating our research at the intersection of, other research that has been done from this, like either different disciplines or, different perspectives, etc. I really don't ascribe to this idea that I'm filling some sort of gap because so much work has already been done on like citizenship and belonging and whatever. But I'm bringing in, the lens of like, let's say, a community which has not been talked about before. And then, when you do the research actually, so many of these things you will be able to say with some certainty once you have done the research, because then you have some findings, right? When you're proposing, it's difficult. It's very difficult to be sure that the question you're asking is a question that only you are asking and not others, right? But you can only do so much, right? In this sense, and your peer review network again, and your literature review are very important tools in this sense to tell you actually that whether you're asking the right question or whatever. And so yeah, don't worry so much about like filling a gap, and worry more about how you can situate your research within the context of what already is.
Yeah, thank you for that answer.
Sreekala, if I could quickly just say this to David's question about how to synthesize, where there's a framework that university provides in terms of when you're reading, how to draw a map of it. So because visually noting and how do you note, take and compare and contrast. So there is a framework which I have. I'm just putting it and pinning it on the chat box. in case it helps people. So just a resource that I'm sharing. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and that the resources that they're sharing will be greatly helpful for people who are currently going on with research. And adding to what we were discussing, there is something that my students also always ask. Every time I ask them to write a paper, they're like, "We had an idea, but once we read it, it's gone because somebody else has already answered it." And this is something I joke about in class, a line that I always use for my students, that we're not here to invent bulb. So we're not making something, but we're trying to identify things in society, things around us, and we're bringing in our perspective. So there is nothing like you were saying, we're not filling a gap, but we're looking at issues, problems, or looking at various themes that we want to work on and bringing in a new perspective. So that's how we should look at research. And it's not like, no, we're completely sculpting something totally new. That's not how a thesis or a PhD thesis works. And also, be it a paper, be it research, anything, like, no, it's also about how we present it from our discipline's perspective.
Right.
I'll take a small example quickly since we're running short of time as well. I worked on use of water. And the moment I said water that I'm working, everyone's suggestion was environmentalists have already done, or environmental studies have already done it. But from the perspective of ancient Indian history, there was a lot to say about it. So there's always a new perspective that you can bring in. So we don't have to worry about completely inventing something new. That's not how research is happening. And I assume there are no more questions, so we'll quickly wind up unless
I just say that, let me just add one thing. I just say that, of course, you have to define the question that you're asking, right, to your committee or whatever. So be more worried about the quality of the argument that you're making, right, and the evidence that you are synthesizing in support of your argument, rather than saying this is the gap that I'm writing. So just saying that, yeah.
And when we the session was about how to read a text and finding the argument, and Dr. Khushdeep was given a lot of extremely useful tips and methods that we can follow while reading. And I think we'll all agree that the final answer to all of it is to keep reading.
To read.
Practice. We can't keep a checklist and then learn how to read in one day. There's no shortcut to it. But do use all these tips and methods, but practice it with reading as you go forward in your research. So I think since there are no more questions, we'll conclude the session. So before we end, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our panelists, to Dr. Khushdeep, and to both the discussants, Parvati and Niteshri, for your time and your valuable insights, and to everybody in the audience for your participation. And I would also like to thank the team members of KashfInitiative for all the work they've put in to make this possible. And we'll also shortly circulate feedback forms, so please fill them. And we want to know what is working and know what is more useful for you so that we can improve future sessions. And if you have any queries or would like to reach out to us, please mail us at contact@kashfinitiative.com. It's also in the chat box. And for those who want to stay updated about the future events and resources, please subscribe to Kashf newsletter. It's there on the website. You can go there and subscribe it. And so that's the best way to make sure that you don't miss out on any upcoming sessions. And if there are any topic that's related to you and or your co-researchers, and you feel that it has not been addressed yet, you can write to us and that will be included in the future session. Or if you have any specific ideas as well on what a session should be, please write. Kashf also organizes targeted sessions for your college or particular departments or select groups. So you can approach us for targeted sessions only for particular audience. Our goal is to make these sessions as accessible and relevant as possible to meet the needs of researchers. And this is why we also record the sessions now, and they will be uploaded on the Kashf YouTube channel, so that you can refer to them later as well. So you can reach out to Kashf team anytime, and we are here to help you on your research journey. And I can always add from my side that as someone who has gone through this process of research, and I don't think submitting PhD is the end of research, but at least has gone through this process of research, discussions are always necessary. So please feel free to reach out. Reaching out is the only way you would go forward to it. Don't hesitate to do that.